All right, and we're up. Um, just want to take a couple of minutes here to introduce an awesome guy and community member for me. We're both down in the same geographical region here. For all of you guys tuning in live, want to welcome you. And I also want to welcome those of you that will be catching this on a replay over the next couple of days. I'm Chris Dial, if I haven't met you or if you haven't seen me yet. And I'm a founder of the Basketball Embassy. And one of our partners as an organization is the San Antonio Spurs and their affiliates. And right now we've got Landry Fields with us from the Austin Spurs, the current general manager. Landry's a former player. If I gave you his full bio, we'd eat up the entire time that we have for him to present. So I'm not going to do that. But Landry, while we're live with these folks, well, two things. One, I want to tell the audience that you've been kind and gracious enough to take some questions. So I'm going to encourage everybody out there to please use that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. We're going to try to save those kind of towards the latter part of the presentation. And then the second thing, Landry, before I give it away to you, is I just want to sincerely thank you again for doing this. I got to catch a deal that you did a week or two ago, and it was awesome. And I was even thinking, watching it, I was like, man, it'd be so cool to get them on doing something with us. And then here you are. You definitely didn't have to do that. And I know these are crazy times, and you guys are kind of staying a different type of busy, but very busy. So I know your time is valuable, but it means a lot to us during this time. We're trying to bring this. There's about 80 countries right now that are kind of getting in and out of these rooms. So it's really cool what you're doing. It's really cool that you are kind of an epitome of the organization you represent, which is we're going to figure out how to help out and serve during any time. So thanks again, man, sincerely.
Yeah, man. Thank you. You made me cry, man. Thank you.
I'm gonna duck out and let you get after it, man. I'm gonna sit here and take notes like everybody else.
Cool. Well, Chris, again, thank you. And to kind of to reiterate what Chris just said about me, I thank you all for joining me today. I know how valuable the commodity of time is, and you're sharing that with me. So I'm extremely grateful that you would honor this time by allowing me to be a part of it. So thank you for joining us today. Please feel free to take notes. And as Chris mentioned, I'll do some Q&A, hopefully with the time that we have left at the end. I would imagine there will be some questions with what's going on today. But to kind of set up what we're going to get into, which is called the Development Square. It's a tool that's used mostly in development. I just want to give you a little bit of background, and it kind of helps the context of setting up the Development Square. As Chris mentioned, I work for the Austin Spurs, I work for the San Antonio Spurs, and I'm the general manager of our G League club. And what was particularly appealing about the job for me was I love development. I don't just love player development, but I love human development and tapping into human potential and seeing and empowering and leveraging and building vision with others to kind of help them get to where they want to be. And for me in particular, seeing what they ultimately could be, and being a part of the Austin crew has allowed me to do that. So it's a very enjoyable job, and I'm very grateful for the job that I do have. So the goal today is to present a tool for you, which, as I said before, is known as the Development Square. And if I'm presenting it correctly, then it should be doing three things for you. The first thing could be summed up in three different ways, and that's through picture, mirror, window. And first and foremost, this tool will act as a picture for you to see reality, hopefully in a clearer, more concise way. What I'm going to go through, intuitively, you probably already do, but what this does is it sort of maps out something for you where you're able to see it, and hopefully you're making the connections of like, oh yeah, I do that, or that I've seen that in my own life, or I've seen that in my player's life, assuming that a bunch of coaches are on this call right now. That's the first thing in terms of picture. The second thing is mirror. Hopefully this tool will act as a mirror for yourself, where you'll be able to overlap it on a number of different developmental journeys that you've been on, from the small things like tying your shoe, to the bigger things of becoming the greatest coach you can be, or the greatest manager you can be, or the greatest trainer you can be, or whatever basketball context you find yourself in. Hopefully it will act as a mirror just for you. And then finally, the real development of it is seeing it as a window, seeing through it into others, into your players, and helping them become the best that they can be. So you're able to use it as a sort of diagnostic on their developmental journey. And journey is sort of the real goal here. That's what the map is. It's going to show you the developmental journey for anybody in anything that we're trying to master. So it's going to take you sort of big picture, and it can be seen as an idea, but I have found it very, very resourceful as a practical tool to help me understand my own journey as a general manager. And then if I'm discussing and chatting with different players, helping them along their own player's journey and helping them be the heroes of their own story. So as I mentioned, feel free to take notes. Be kind of a lot. I'll take a 30-second break in between, just kind of give you a chance to write whatever you need to write down, and we can address that later. Okay, so today we're going to get into, again, the development square. And as sort of a background, which is kind of going to help me set this up, I'm going to be reverting back to this time and time again. I'm going to give you just a brief backstory of my developmental journey as a collegiate player. I went to Stanford University, and like most freshmen, if you're a college coach, they come in with a great deal of excitement. For me in particular, I was excited about the team. I was excited about playing in a Power 5 conference in the Pac-10 at the time. Now it's the Pac-12. And the trajectory of that team was seemingly going up and up and up, and I was just happy and excited to be a part of that. My sophomore year, I faced some adversity. There was some suffering there, you could say, where I kind of hit this pit stage, this valley of my developmental journey where I was living the unknown, and there was a lot of unknown that I had to go through. And after kind of going through that unknown, into my third year, my junior year, I started to see progress and fruit from the time that I had put in, and sort of the valley and the pits that I found myself in as a sophomore. Sorry, excuse me. There's somebody calling right now. And so I had the opportunity, we had a coaching change, and from there started to get a little bit more time. And then going into my senior year, that was really the launch pad, which helped me become an NBA player, and ultimately into what I am today as a general manager. So the development square, if you are familiar with Joseph Campbell and his archetypal hero's journey, you'll see that it's sort of an adaptation of that. You'll see a lot of different elements of a universal pattern of story. You'll see a lot of story in this. You'll see a lot of background of my own history and even some of the spurs. So as we set up this developmental square, we start in what's known as stage 1. Now the D stands for development, so don't get caught up on that. Stage 1 is this. It's called unconscious incompetence. Or more sort of realistically, this is where we on our developmental journey and as players, they have this sort of blind confidence going on. As mentioned before, in my own journey, there is a great deal of excitement as we start off in this stage 1 of whatever could be. Before we do anything, there is always a level of excitement of what could be. If any of you have kids, you understand that like the thought of having kids, there's a level of excitement for that. If you're taking a new job, there's a level of excitement that's moving you from one place to uproot to go to the next. It's the same thing for players. There's an excitement of what could be. If you're moving on to the college ranks, if you're moving on to the pro ranks, there's that excitement that gets you to actually get out of wherever you're at in a particular moment of your life and transition into the next. You see, it's the excitement for the ideal vision that we have that gets us actually to uproot and do something completely new. Otherwise, if you think about it, we probably might not do anything at all. You see, our visions of more justify our progressive action. The vision for more, the vision that the players have to become the best players that they can be, will justify the actions that they need to take in order to get to where they want to be as a player. coming into Stanford, I had this grand vision of a magazine cover. Now, I came in with Brooke and Robin Lopez, and if you're familiar with them, they're twins, and they're enormous twins, 7-foot twins, and they play for the Milwaukee Bucks. And we were the same graduating class at Stanford. They left school early, and I stayed all 4 years. But I remember when I committed, knowing that they were already going to go to Stanford, I had this vision. And the vision was us on the front of a Slam magazine cover or Sports Illustrated magazine cover. Me, I'm in a Stanford Cardinal uniform holding a basketball, and the twins are behind me in like these suits with glasses on, and it's sort of acting as like my Secret Serviceman. In the caption of the magazine cover saying, you know, Stanford freshmen take the Pac-10 and then the NCAA completely by storm. Like, I had this confidence in me, which was completely blind, but it was that vision for more which got me excited and ultimately propelled me to actually do something about my basketball career. So if we were able to summarize this unconscious incompetence stage one, it could be summarized by like this: we don't know what we don't know. And that's where the blind comes in. We don't know what we don't know. And unfortunately, what happens is when we enter into stage one, very quickly we have what's called the fall. Now, when we actually have kids, or when we actually step onto a new college campus, when we get into a new organization or a new franchise, we understand that things are very different than how we expected them to be. Our vision for it is not quite the same as when you're actually going through it. That's the fall is the pivotal point when the idealism of something, the idealistic vision you have, quickly turns into realism. You know, no matter if you're a parent, again, no matter how many parenting books you read, there's nothing quite like having the experience of actually being a parent when that child comes into the world. My firstborn son, he's 6 years old now. When we first brought him home, and this is a true story, I sat there for about 10 minutes when we got home. My wife went to take a nap because she just gave birth. And I sat there looking at my son, and I had to use the bathroom. And I was torn between taking him into the bathroom with me or leaving him outside. Like, I didn't know if you could like just go and leave a child behind for like 5-10 minutes if you needed to use the restroom. Like that sort of realism hit me, and that was something I could not forecast in terms of having kids. Like, I don't say to use the bathroom. I didn't take them with me, but you get the picture. And this is the same sort of thing that happened for me when I mentioned going into that fall or that sophomore season of my years at Stanford. You know, I got to Stanford, and all of a sudden I'm hit with the new reality of classes and teammates that are much bigger and faster and stronger. And this is the first time as a human being I lived away from the house, so I was living alone at the time. And to add on top of that, if any of you are coaches and you're in recruiting mode is very much like salesmen. And so you're kind of pitched this vision of what you could be at the next level of college. But then when you do get on campus, that recruiting hat comes off for you coaches. And now all of a sudden you're these completely new brand of coaches, and you're really getting after guys, and you're trying to get the best out of them. You're hard on guys. And for me, this was a complete and utter shock. Like, after 1 month into my Stanford career, I quickly realized that vision of me and the Lopez twins on the Sports Illustrated cover, that probably might not happen. So I hit this fall, and all of a sudden now what we can summarize the fall as is we now know what we don't know. Now we understand things that we had no way of envisioning before. And what happens is we have this fall, and we land in what's known as, keep it up here, it's known as the pit. My incredible drawings here. Okay. We quickly fall into the pit, and this turn or this fall lands us into stage 2 of the developmental journey. In stage 2 of the developmental journey is known as this. This is D2, and this is conscious, forgive my handwriting, it's a C, not an E, conscious incompetence. Okay. Or Your blind confidence now quickly turns to no confidence. You've got no confidence now. You had no way of envisioning what was about to happen. So now all that excitement, it's completely gone. We now know what we don't know. You see, when we land in the pit of our developmental journey, the brightness of the North Star, which allowed us to continue or start the journey in and of itself, that begins to diminish. You know, as coaches, if you're going into a new role or you're going into a new team or new environment, you're hired somewhere else, you know, things like difficult player personalities is something that can land you in the pit. You're not ready for that. You're a new coach that comes in, and the players beforehand, especially which happens in college, is they leave, they go somewhere else because they haven't built a relationship with you. They built a relationship with the previous coach. There's a pressure to perform for you coaches all the time, and I get it. In management, that's something we have to consistently not be tempted to do. But you can feel it. Like, you're there, you want to perform, you want to win, you want to make the best out of your players. You know, and like me, transitioning into a general manager role, I had to uproot my family from California and move to San Antonio. That being uprooted and having my family transition to a completely brand new environment, that was a very, very difficult stage, not just for them, but for me, having to walk through that with them, while at the same time trying to balance a brand new job and trying to be the best that I could be. So I landed here in this pit stage of my own general management career. And players can do the same thing. And what happens is when we all land in the pit, you can feel lonely. You can begin to feel regret having moved from one spot to the next in the first place. And you can feel extremely disoriented at this time. Now, again, when players enter the pit, you know, it's very similar to how it was for me at Stanford. You have a brand new higher level of competition. There's a pressure to perform, not just the expectations you put on yourself, but from coaches, from families, from friends. And if you're in the college setting, you know, there's this new expectation where you're juggling, you know, the school aspect as well as the basketball aspect. You're waking up at 6 a.m., going to weights, then going to class, then going back to practice, then going to class. And this is a whole brand new field for these players. Now that's in college, and, you know, in the pros, it's much different. And the expectations are sometimes similar and sometimes they're different, but there's countless reasons why we all enter the pit. You see, when we are players are in this stage and we're feeling sort of lonely, we're feeling some regret, we're feeling disoriented, all we want to do is we want to get back here. We want to get back to the excitement that set us on this journey in the first place. We want to go back to that blind confidence, that unknown. You know, you always hear that it's said, like, ignorance is bliss, and there's a level of truth to that. You know, you want to stay with things as they are and they're comforting, but the moment you hit something new, something you could not account for, you end up hitting this pit stage. So what happens is, whenever we as leaders or as coaches or as players, when we hit this pit stage, we are faced with three temptations. The first temptation is simply to quit. And you see this, you know, maybe you've seen it with some of your players. You know, things like, you know, basketball is just not for me. You know, I'd rather be doing something else. So I'm just going to take my hands off. I'm going to pivot and I'm going to go and completely do something new. You know, it's rare usually to find that, especially at the higher levels, because they put so much work into it. But that temptation is absolutely there. The second temptation that they might have, or we might have when we enter this pit stage, is stagnation. We become stagnant. We become kind of a lull amongst the group. Sometimes you see this in players, you know, they give the bare minimum. They're not there. They're not fully engaged. They might not be doing the extra work that it's going to take for them to ultimately get out of the pit. But you see it. You can see it on their faces. You can see it on their body language. They're not hanging out as much with their teammates off the court. Even in our staff circles or in leadership, you know, you're transitioning, and, you know, there's so much on your plate. You're tired. You don't want to necessarily go out and have a beer with other people. You become stagnant. Those pivotal relationships that you need for any organization or any staffing are crucial, and it's difficult to kind of muster up the energy to go out and do that so that the team or the staffing or the organization is at its fullest and brightest potential. And the third thing, apart from quit, stagnation, and this is to, forgive the pun, this is a pandemic amongst just college basketball right now. It's the transfer. If you're a college coach, you understand that there were over 2,000 transfers in the last 3 years of college basketball. That's 696, give or take, a year on average. This is what we all think. This is what players think. You know, the grass is green on the other side. I chose this college, but I should have went to this college. You know, they had a better program. They were offering me the world. You know, I made the wrong decision. That's that regret that comes in. You know, for me personally, this was my biggest temptation. I was having a very rough year, my freshman year and sophomore year at Stanford. Wasn't getting a lot of playing time. My coaches were extremely hard on me. School was next level. I never experienced anything like that before. And I remember calling my parents and saying, hey, I don't want to be here anymore. I want to go to wherever. I don't even remember where I said I wanted to go. I just wanted to leave Stanford at that point in time. But they did a great job of reminding me how hard I had to work just to get into Stanford, and that I needed to just continue on the journey no matter how hard it got. Because my temptation and what I ultimately ended up doing, and what you might see in your players, is there's a lot of scapegoating, there's a lot of blame shifting, there's a lot of finger pointing. Very rare for young, developing, sort of immature players to take a look in the mirror and say, hey, where is it that I can be better? Where does my game need to grow? You know, how can I plan to manage the juggling of school and academics and the different personalities that I'm facing here at work? You know, who do I need to talk to about the pressures of this college life or this organization right now? In the pit, like I said, we are always looking for the nearest exit sign. And here's the hope of it all. And this is actually where we as leaders and as coaches, this is, if we can think about it and put it in perspective, this is exactly where we and our players, we want them to be. You see, because in the pit is where where we find players most open and most humble to actually change. It's in this stage where character and competency is cultivated the most. And it's through three things. Just like the temptations, there's three things that we have to cultivate within players and ourselves when we enter this pit stage. The first thing, and this should be kind of obvious, is humility. We have to communicate things like, hey, you're not as good today as you will be tomorrow. We can't just communicate that to the players that we're coaching or the staff members that we're leading, but we have to communicate that to ourselves. You know, there's a good saying that says, what got you here, it's not going to get you there. What got you here won't get you there. Whatever you were doing beforehand to get you to this point, it's going to take a whole heck of a lot of creativity and something new for you to ultimately get to that goal or that North Star that you set out to achieve in the first place. And this is challenging for anybody, no matter your age or no matter what background you're in, because it's difficult for people that are in this pit stage to actually ask for help. And one of the main culprits as to why is ego gets in the way. And I'm not necessarily knocking ego. I think we all have ego. If you define ego as the story you tell yourself about yourself, everyone has an ego. We all have a narrative in which we're living out into the world. It's in the pit where the narrative actually changes about authorization. It's, imagine if you're writing a story, somebody comes and bullies you out of the way and then finishes your story for you. Like that's ego. That's difficult to accept. But that's what the pit is actually doing to the narratives in which we're living. This is what's happening to the players when the narrative actually changes for them. So in order to kind of encapsulate this pit stage and the cultivation that you need to get the competency out of it, it takes brutal honesty, and it's being honest about the way in which things are. As mentioned right here, it takes an incredible amount of humility, and that's just accepting the things in which they are. And finally, it's this self-love that you have to have. And I always hesitate to use that word self-love, because whenever you throw out the word love, people automatically gravitate towards like the romantic Valentine's Day love. And that's not at all what I'm talking about here. When I say self-love, what I'm defining that as is a belief in a better version of yourself. A better version of yourself as a player, if you're a player, as a coach, if you're a coach, as a manager, as a trainer, as a parent, as a spouse, whatever, a doctor, a lawyer, a firefighter, it doesn't matter. We have to have this belief that there's a better version of who we can be out there. So that's humility. And the second thing here is hunger. It's going to take hunger a lot of times for a new vision of things, or it's going to take hunger for a different pathway in order to get to the goals or the North Star in which we set out to achieve. Coming into my freshman year, I never lost vision that I could have been an NBA player. The vision was not the stumbling block for me, nor necessarily the problem. For me, my stumbling block was actually going to be the pathway in which I got there. You know, if I had any expectations of being a one and done, which I really didn't, that was quickly shifted. The pathway was not going to be one and done to the NBA. The pathway for me, and I knew this early on, was I was going to be a 4-year player. And the same is true for most people and most players. We want to achieve our goals as fast and as quickly and as efficiently as possible. You know, we think, you know, if you can kind of paint this out, we think it's just going to be like this. Boom, we get to our ultimate goal. And the truth is if this is the goal right here, like our journey looks like something like this. And go around it, circling around, and then boom, we finally get there. You know, a lot of times that's the journey that we have to have realistic expectations about when we do enter this stage 2, or the pit is going to actually do it for us. So that's humility, that's hunger. And the third thing that we have to have is hard work. Humility, hunger, and hard work. At the Spurs, we have a saying. It's called "Pound the Rock," and I know that that's very familiar to a lot of people in the basketball world. But I find it fascinating, especially when you dig into where "Pound the Rock" comes from, and it actually comes from the analogy of a stone cutter. Now, a stone cutter's job is to take these giant boulders, and what they need to do is they need to crack those things down to tiny little rocks. And so what they do in order to do this is they just continuously hit the boulder, you know, boom, 1, boom, 2, boom, 3, you know, you get to 50, 51, boom, 98, 99, 100th. And it's on that 100th blow where the entire boulder actually cracks. You see, the wisdom of a stone cutter is this. They understand that it's not the 100th blow that got the boulder to crack. It's all the 99 blows that came before it. And I love that picture. I love that analogy. You know, what that does for us is it sets up realistic expectations for any developmental journey that we're on, especially for players. You know, when they're grinding away in the gym for hours and hours and hours at a time, we see that this practice is not going to show fruit until much, much later, but they have to trust the process, unfortunately, to use another sort of cliche basketball term, that things are ultimately going to get better. You know, as we're looking at this, the humility and hunger are great, but they don't mean anything without hard work. And the reverse is true. You can be working all day long, but without humility and hunger, it doesn't mean anything. You're not going anywhere. I love the quote from John Wooden, who says, never mistake activity for achievement. You know, just because you're doing something, it doesn't mean you're going anywhere. I can be running around in circles. I'm doing something, but I'm not going anywhere. If I don't have a vision, if I don't have a hunger, if I don't have humility, I can't ultimately reach that. And it's the reverse. The reverse is true. I can have all the vision, humility, and hunger I want for something, but if I don't put in the necessary work, then I'm not going to actually go anywhere. So let me take just a 30-second break, because I imagine that that's a lot right there. Just take 30 seconds. I know there's going to be some room for Q&A. Take 30 seconds, just write down a note or two that we can potentially come back to at the end. Okay. So we're in the pit, and as leaders, as managers, as coaches, when players or our surrounding staff, when they're in the pit, we have to go and meet them right where they're at. And I can't overstate this enough, because excuse me, I feel like this is a common temptation for any leader. It's very easy to sit on one island and call out to the other island where your staff member is at or your player is at, and you're just saying, hey, come over here, like come over here, like that's ultimately not going to get it done. You might get some progress, but you're not going to get the full weight of the progress that you want. The job of a leader or the job of a guide is to actually build a bridge over to another person's island and steadily meet them where they're at and surely walk them back across to the island in which you set out for them. You see, because every great story, every great developmental journey, it has a guide or a sage. If you're familiar with Lord of the Rings, this is Gandalf to Frodo. If you're not a Lord of the Rings guy, if you're a Star Wars person, this is Yoda to Luke Skywalker. Or if you're like me, my personal favorite movies are the Christopher Nolan Batman movies. And you can see this actually in The Dark Knight Rises. And if you're not familiar with The Dark Knight Rises, there's a villain, his name is Bane. He whoops up on Batman, kind of hurts Batman, puts Batman in this prison, which is actually, it's literally a pit. It's a prison that goes hundreds and hundreds of feet deep into the ground. So we can actually call that a pit. It's a great analogy. He beats him up, puts him in the pit, and then he goes and takes over Gotham City and is threatening this whole nuclear attack. Now in this prison, in this pit, Batman is slowly recovering. He's getting his strength back up. And when he's in this pit, he meets another prisoner who's been in the pit for a very, very long time. This guy has experienced everything. He's been in there so long, he's actually gone blind. He can barely walk. But even though he has no vision, he still has seen a lot of things and he's experienced a lot of things. And Batman is struck there because he's watching this movie, or the news channel of what's happening in Gotham City when he's in this prison. And he has this willingness. He's like, I got to get out of this prison. I got to go save Gotham City. And he has no idea how to do it, how to get out of the prison because it's so far down. And what this other prisoner, this old sage, kind of tells him is like, hey, there's been one person that's gotten out of this prison before, and it was this little girl. And what she did is she climbed out of it. And Batman's thinking, he's like, okay, so all I got to do is climb out of it. But what happens if I get all the way up to the top of this prison and I end up falling? And the guy's like, well, you end up falling to your death, so why don't you use a rope? So Batman, he goes, he climbs up, he gets to the top, he gets to this one ledge that is like, 10, 12 feet across, and he jumps and he doesn't make it. He falls down, he's got the rope on him, he swings down. So he tries it again in another scene, same thing, it doesn't happen. That ledge is just way too far for him to grasp. So he gets all the way down, and he's talking to himself, looking up into the prison to his ultimate freedom. And he's asking, how did the girl do it? Like, what was her technique? What was her strategy? And this old prisoner, he says, you've been doing it wrong. You actually have to do it how the girl did it. And he's like, Batman's like, well, how did the girl do it? And he says, she did it without a rope. And so now Batman's torn. He knows he has to be all in, because if he gets to that ledge again, he jumps and doesn't make it. He falls to his death. However, that was the pivot and the motivation that he needed in order for him to be all in, to muster up the energy to actually get over to the ledge that he needed to get to and climb out. That's the job and the importance of any sage in that point in time. They have to show the hero, we have to show the player, we have to show our staff members a better vision or a pivot that's needed in order for them to overcome some obstacle, in order for them to achieve their ultimate goals. Ultimately, Batman got out and he saved, the world and Gotham City, if you've seen the story. So what that prisoner does is what any leader or any coach should do, is what they do is they build a ladder for their players and their staff members. And this ladder is helping any of the heroes or their players actually get out of the pit. And they do it by 3 different things. Do it first and foremost by vision. Anytime you're in a pit, you need vision in order to get out of a pit. A lot of times, we as leaders, we actually have to hold a North Star or the vision for a player in order for them to get out of the pit. There's an irony there. It's vision that gets you into the pit, but it's going to be vision that gets you out of the pit. We had an example this year in Austin with one of our developing players. And for him, part of his developmental journey was actually, he had to overcome a level of toughness in order for him to move on in his journey as an NBA career. And this year we had a situation where, he comes in, he's not feeling well, he's got a bit of a cold, And he tells the trainer, and the trainer tells him like, hey, I think you're good to go. You can actually play. But, this player said, no, I'm not going to play today. So the trainer calls me and he says, hey, so-and-so is not going to play today. He's not feeling well. And I'm like, well, is he throwing up? Does he have a fever? He's like, no, he doesn't have any of those things. He just has a cold. And all I'm thinking about is the times where me as a player, I've had a cold, or I've seen other players, they play through colds. So what happens is our staff who did an incredible job here, they're talking to this player, they're telling him, and they get him to a point where they at least are going to have him warm up. Like, he'll do the warm up and see how he feels. I show up to the game and I go and talk to this player one-on-one. I go to the medical room, I close the door and I say, hey, so-and-so, how you feeling? What's going on? And this player says he's sick. And I said, okay, well, let's think about this. What's your ultimate goal as a player? And because right now we're in Austin. Like, Austin is the G League. What's your ultimate goal? And he's like, well, I want to be in San Antonio full time. And I'm like, good. That's the vision you need to have. That's the North Star you need to have. And then I asked him another question. I said, when we think about a San Antonio Spur, what kind of player are we recruiting to be a San Antonio Spur? What are some ingredients that go into it? And he said, well, we want, high character, hardworking, tough individuals. And he said it in that order. And I was like, great, he's throwing me a lob right now. I said, good. We want hardworking, high character, tough individuals when we get to San Antonio. And then I asked him another question. I said, hey, what's an area of your development where you actually can grow in most right now? He sat back and thought about it, and he knew what I was getting at. He actually said, he asked me if he even had a choice in playing. And I said, yeah, of course you have a choice to play. I can never force you to play. But you just mentioned that you have a North Star, you have a goal, and right now you have an incredible opportunity to actually take a huge jump in a specific area that you need to overcome in order for you to be a San Antonio Spur full time. Ultimately, he goes and he plays, and for me, it wasn't about him going out there and playing well. It was about him going out and playing it all. Like, that was the win right there. That was the whole development that we wanted. And what that took was us as leaders, from myself to my staff, because it wasn't just me in that moment. It was a collective group effort where we had to hold the vision for that player in that particular time period. So, and by the way, he actually went out and he actually had a pretty good game. So vision is the first thing. The second thing is time. It takes time. It takes time from our end. It takes patience. It takes a level of humility from us as coaches and as leaders. It takes a great deal of empathy, of an accepting a player right where they're at. It takes a great deal of listening to what it is that they need to overcome a certain obstacle, much like in that former player's story that I mentioned. We have to listen in order to guide them. And then it takes a belief, very much like self-love is the belief of self, a better version of our own self. Belief is just the belief in another person or a player that they can be a better version of themselves as whatever they're journeying off into. I had a specific coach who did this for me my junior year. He came over in a new coaching staff, and he was one of the first coaches. His name is Mike Schwager. He's one of the first coaches that actually gave me a vision to be an NBA player, one that was confirming what I wanted to believe about myself. It was that self-love and his belief which actually propelled me to start taking the necessary jumps to be an NBA player. And the final thing you need to get out of the pit, and what we need to be cultivating in these players or staff members, are resources. Resources, they're the obvious things. They are leveraging our time, gym access, making sure players have enough food, they have the proper diets and meals. It's the strength performance that goes into it. At this stage, unfortunately, there's a lot of mental health resources that we need to leverage and give to our staff and our players if they so need them. And probably the biggest resource of all that we all need in any aspect of our lives and any aspect of our developmental journey is we need really good community. If you think about a team, this is where teammates or your staff members, they're so important. Hiring and recruiting any individual is pivotal for the success of that team or that organization. A good community will carry each other's burdens. They'll accept others right where they're at, yet they're going to challenge them beyond where they're at so they can be better versions of themselves. They'll be encouragers. There'll be all sorts of things. It's always better to go through the trenches with people anyway, because you're bound to hit the pit at some stage. And that's an incredible resource that we have to have. We have to have really good people in our lives, especially in these developmental journeys. So after a whole bunch of vision and time and resources and humility and hunger and hard work, finally now we get to stage 3. And in stage 3, we have E3 conscious competence. Conscious competence. Now, as that competence was once blind, then you went to no competence. Now you have what's called sober competence. You're thinking much more clearly now after you've gone through that stage of the pit. You now know what you know. What beforehand, you didn't know what you know, then you knew what you didn't know. Now you know what you know. Players have learned something. You're starting to see the results of coaches or as leaders within their whole developmental journey. You know, this is the first time you tied your shoe, to bring it back to some of the micro examples. The first time you tied your shoe, you're not an expert right away, but after all the looping and swooping and pulling in the pit of that and the developmental journey of that, finally you do it. Doesn't make you an expert, but now you're starting to see some results. You're not going to step on the court right away and be Michael Jordan, but you could step on the court and be productive for a team setting or for a staff setting and whatnot. And my favorite part of this whole journey, this is actually a pivotal point too, where we have an opportunity to now give leadership responsibilities to players or staff members that are actually in this stage of their developmental journey. Now what you can do is you can pair them back with other players, other freshmen, other rookies, other new staff members that are about to go through the same experiences that they are about to go through. Because the temptation is, once you get out of the pit and you get to this third stage, the temptation is to start to rev off and go super fast. As leaders and as coaches, what we need to do is we need to start giving mentorship opportunities. And there's strategy behind it. You fight the temptation to go fast by giving them this leadership opportunity because, one, it's helping build the camaraderie of your team by bringing them back to the new players. You're building that rapport and that team chemistry, which is absolutely crucial. But at the same time, when you're doing this with players that are in this stage and you're giving them these opportunities, the unfortunate thing is they're bound to make mistakes. And when we make mistakes, we're humbled. And when we're humbled, as we saw in the pit, we're most open to change, we're most open to pivot. We have this air of humility where we are not going to think highly of ourselves. And if you're giving opportunities for other people to, I mean, if you're putting it bluntly, if you give them opportunities to fail, you keep them in a low grade level of humility the entire time. Not that every player or staff member needs that, but if you want to kind of keep it as fertile ground for your organization or your staff or your team, you want to continuously have a level of humility amongst your players. And not only that, what you're doing, and it's an old adage, and we can debate all day about the percentages and whatnot. They say something like you learn 10% of what you read and 30% of what you hear and 90% of what you teach to others. And the percentages are totally not important. The importance is seen at which opportunity will you actually learn and grow the most. So if you're pairing yourselves to your players with other players or other staff members, what you're doing is you're allowing them to reteach themselves tools that they've learned. It's just basically carrying on the whole process, and you're starting the whole cycle all over again to, again, build that team chemistry that you do want. Ideally, all major developments would have, they'd have these three things. You have beyond, beside, and let me fit this in here, behind. On the developmental journey, you want somebody beyond. You want an expert. You want somebody that you're chasing after. You want somebody beside. You want a good teammate. You want somebody who's going to go into the trenches with you, that you're learning and dialoguing with and reflecting on and having all these conversations so you both are kind of growing together. And then finally, you want somebody behind. And that's sort of the purpose of the leadership responsibilities here. As you're passing along the information and the wisdom that you've been given, you're at the same time cultivating and developing a new crop or a new wave of personnel that's coming in. So after we hit that, your players are starting to see results. You yourself are starting to see results of the development that you're making. You enter the final stage here, And this is the beautiful stage that we all want to be in. This is D4. And this is unconscious competence. Or this is really the mature competence that players need. And these are where all the greats are at. This is the Michael Jordans, Kobe Bryants, the Tim Duncans, the Ginobilis. All these players enter this stage. You see high-level executives enter this stage as well, where they've been doing what they've been doing for such a long time, it becomes like second nature for them. This stage can be summed up as, we don't know what we know. We're no longer consciously thinking about the things that we're developing, and it's just second nature for us. We're just, I don't think about necessarily about how to tie my shoe anymore. I know for the greatest players, you don't necessarily think about using your left hand. Like, it's just something that's a part of you now. Even your practice settings, where like Tim Duncan's a great example. He comes in, he still shoots on a gun every day in our Spurs practice facility. And we love that. That's something that's unconsciously happening for him. He just goes out there and he does it. It's not something he has to necessarily think about anymore. When you have a bunch of players, if you're in colleges like your senior players, if you have a ton of your players in this stage right here, you have such a great deal of flow and chemistry and a bunch of talent. And hopefully, if you're doing it right, and if the teammates are doing it right, and you have that camaraderie, this is what builds championship level teams. This is what goes into winning. This is what goes into incredible, well-balanced staffs as well. So that's a lot right there. And that's everything. It's sort of about the developmental square. I would imagine this thing's resonating. Hopefully I didn't go too fast and I was clear and concise in some things, but if you have any questions, I am happy to stay as long as you need me to and answer anything you got. So I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
No, Landry, thank you so much, man. This is great stuff. I'm sitting here listening to you and understanding why I did not get into Stanford. You know what I mean? So that, if anything, I may have made a little trek halfway around the square. We've got a couple of questions, man. I want to come to you with one right away, if you don't mind. We'll jump in. This coach is asking what the toughest time for you was within your developmental square, like what your toughest time was and how'd you come out of it? And then the second part of the question is, as a GM, have you ever been in the pit?
Oh, yeah, it's the answer is the pit for both of those questions. It's just so difficult because, again, you're feeling, you can feel lonely in there. You can feel like the world is caving in on me. It's super disorienting. So you don't necessarily know what you're doing. You thought you made a good decision to do something, and then it quickly hits the fan and everything's going completely different than you expected it to be. So yeah, I absolutely hit that as a player. This first year as a GM, I think for me it was difficult because I uprooted from an area where I was heavy in relationship with a lot of people in great community, but this opportunity I had with the Spurs was something that I couldn't pass up and I didn't want to ignore. And it wasn't just me that went through that. Nothing happens in my life in a vacuum. I have my wife and I have my kids. And so it took an incredible amount of sacrifice and love from them to pour into this journey that I'm on right now.
That what you just said, Landry, kind of liaisons into probably your next answer, because the next question again about the pit. The pit is like, I think that resonates with a lot of people. I think people right now under these feel like they're in some sort of. But the question was, how do you minimize the time that you spend in that pit, and how do you expedite the time that you get out and grow from it in terms of, you just mentioned family maybe as a factor or variable in that, when you're in there, what are some things that you could throw out probably to coaches on a personal level, but also as instructors that we could share, with our players and our cohorts and staff?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And to your point, with COVID-19, we're sort of in this collective pit right now because we've never navigated this space before. At least in our lifetime. So we're all trying new things. I mean, this whole Zoom boom right now is something that we never thought we'd have to do. and we're having to make adjustments, and we're having to have to be flexible and very humble in this particular time period. But I'm going to, and that's a great question, because, and I mentioned that when we enter the pit stage, we want to get out of that sucker as quickly as possible. We hate the pit. There's always those three temptations of quitting, becoming stagnant, or transferring, or doing something else. But really, and how can I say this correctly? You don't want, it sounds weird and counterintuitive and counterproductive, but you don't necessarily want to get out of the pit as quick as you can, because it's actually in the pit where you're growing the most. Like, it's in the valleys of life. And I don't mean to preach like that, but it really is. It's like these pitfalls. If you look back at your own history, the times where you grew the most and you matured the most and you transformed the most were probably in the times of suffering and adversity and things that you've been through that you in no way, shape, or form wanted to go through. But it's in those times where you're learning, you're being creative, you're connecting new, pathways in your brain, which are instrumental to anything to change or be creative with. So my encouragement for a question like that is really change your perspective on it, change the paradigm of the pit, and don't necessarily see it as an enemy, see it as an advocate for what you're trying to do, what you're trying to develop in. And if you can, oh my goodness, if you can get that and that perspective into your players, like the boom and the amount of trajectory of growth that they have and transformation that they could potentially have will be exponential. But that's the point. You got to have them buy into the vision. You got to give it time, and you have to leverage all your resources you can while they're in that stage. And the truth is you never necessarily climb out of the pit. You almost find yourself out of the pit. It's almost like this weird, like, oh, like I'm not in the pit anymore. Like, I'm doing what I'm doing consciously, but it's not as difficult anymore. And I would imagine over time, if you're thinking about COVID-19, those first few weeks, there was excitement, and then boom, everything hit the fan for what could be. Now you're in the pit, but now I think we've gotten used to the idea of what it is, wearing masks, doing Zoom, pivoting, and whatnot. So
That's great, man. I feel like we're all on your couch right now a little bit. So this is good stuff for us. Another question, Landry, with the time that we have left. You mentioned about midway through the session, humility, talking about it in the context of hunger and hard work. But humility, to me, as somebody that's buzzed around this community, I was born and raised in San Antonio. So, the San Antonio Spurs have been as much a part of my life as breakfast has,
Yeah.
And I can't, you cannot get near the Spurs in any capacity without being overwhelmed by humility. How important, how significant is it? And then also just in your transition down here with this organization, frame humility a little bit for this audience.
Oh, wow. Such a huge question. And I see a question there. I'll provide my email, and we can stay in contact with the coaches. I don't mind having that connection. So I'll write that right after this. But humility within any organization is just so instrumental. And if you take it to the micro first, there's a whole bunch of research that's done around emotional intelligence right now, and having that level of humility is what's instrumental in having a great deal of self-awareness. Because there's a quote I live by is, you can't change what you can't see. Humility kind of gives you the eyes to accept things in the way they are. You become more self-aware of your strengths and your weaknesses, and from self-awareness then comes self-leadership. And if you're able to lead yourself, you're able to lead it because you had that first awareness. You're able to see it in the first place. And humility was one of the main ingredients in actually doing that. And if you take it even further in terms of emotional intelligence, if you go from self-awareness to self-leadership, now you can start having an others awareness. You can start having an empathy for others, because you yourself have identified what you've gone through. You've learned how to pivot and be actionable out of it. Now you can get into better leadership, because I can go to you and say, like, hey, you're going through this pit stage. And you know what? I went through that too. I know what it's like to be in the pit. And if you get into an others awareness, you're building this trust and this camaraderie and this chemistry with a person. And then you take it to its full extent, and this is coaching. This now becomes others' leadership. They trust you with their developmental journey. They trust you with the relationship. And honestly, it all started with honesty and humility of yourself in order for you to adequately lead another person. So that's a lot there. And humility, I've been humbled, I feel like, to the bones. I'm kind of tired of the humility in this first year, because this organization, they're a pillar of success over the last 2 decades, and to come in and be a part of it was, at times it's scary. You're dealing with people that are very, very intelligent, very smart, very experienced, and I found myself having to have good mentors in this organization, from RC to Brian Wright to George Felton as a scout, Dave Tellup, Chris Grant, who's a scout, Brent Berry, who's our VP of basketball operations. Everyone's been so good for me, and I'll write here my email.
That's awesome, man. While you're doing that, yeah, you rattle off those names, and I'm just thinking, like, what an incredible list of positively influential people, in so many different ways. It's just such a unique organization. It's a real pleasure and joy to have been fortunate enough to be born here. You don't get to pick where you get to be born, but I popped up on the southeast side of San Antonio and have had this crutch, so to speak, my whole life, that I've been able to lean on as a professional, as a man, and as everything else. So look, before we let you run out of here, in terms of we've talked about it, you've referenced it contextually. This is such a crazy time, and we're just immersed, with day-to-day ticker tape updates of this situation. It's overwhelming in itself. But for the part of our audience, Landry, that's not sitting here in San Antonio, not in the States even, but that is abroad, dealing with a similar set of circumstances, what would you tell players right now in terms of, obviously contextually with this development square that you talked about, because most of the audience is coaches, but this will find its way to a handful of players at every level, in their developmental stage. If you could just give them some friendly advice, like they were standing behind you at Starbucks and you got to talking about basketball, what would be one thing that you'd leave with people, like a player, from a player's perspective, during these times, how we can, manage as best we can, get out of our own heads, but stay in it appropriately, those types of things. What would you have to say?
Oh gosh. In the talk, and on purpose, because it's such a crucial point of the developmental journey in this tool, I spent the majority of my time talking about the pit. It's one of those things where I don't think you can overstate it enough, because when you're going through anything and there's that difficulty that comes up and you're having to pivot and the narrative changes, it is very, very difficult for people in this stage. I would say that the majority of people get caught up, and specifically with a player, if I had more time over coffee, I would sit down and just try and write this out in like a napkin, a much cleaner version. And I would show them, like, hey, if you can trust me on this one, this is what your journey will kind of look like. And it doesn't mean you'll be like 10,000 feet deep in a pit. Sometimes it's just like a little ditch, you get out and you're good. Like the pit is a different degree for different people, depending on their context and their circumstances. So for them, I would show them, like, hey, you're going to go through something. And this is what I hope to bring, especially to players as we come up on next season. I know a lot of times you're not going to believe me. I get it. You're going to have to experience it. I'm a stove toucher too. I got to touch the stove to make sure that I know it's hot and whatnot. But here's a basic map of things. And it depends. You're going to go, like, that's why I love this. It's just a universal pattern of something, because it can be overlapped on your whole developmental journey. It can be overlapped on you trying to learn how to shoot a basketball. It's different degrees. No matter what the altitude that you're at, that you want to look at it, it's applicable, and it's multifaceted, and it's applicable to learning anything, not just basketball. And it would really come down to, you're going to hit this pit stage, but I want you to just remember, think back to a time where you went through something very difficult and see yourself in this, see how this happened. This is no different. This is going to be something where if you trust us, we're going to come alongside you. We're going to hold the vision for you. We're going to give you some time. We're going to pour every resource and leverage every community aspect we have into your development, because you will ultimately hit this. You know, being in Austin or being in a G League program means you're developing in something that you just can't get around that. Just trust us. That's what's particularly helped me as I've gone through my own developmental journey, is I have to think back to a time where I went through it before and I came out on the other side and actually got to stage 4 of unconscious competence. And now I'm cruising along. So that's what I would give them.
It's awesome stuff, man. We'd be fortunate to stand next to you in a line at Starbucks, but and listen, again, I have the fortunate privilege to be around a lot of people that work for your organization, and not telling you anything you don't know, but there's a lot of folks, me included, that are really, really happy that you're here. I think the Spurs in Austin are lucky to have you. We were definitely lucky to have you today to share with us and take some time. It was extremely meaningful, very insightful stuff. And I also, Andrew, as we kind of sign off, I wanted to remind our friends that are watching this live and then the ones that will watch the replay, that, as the Spurs continue to contribute to the global community's efforts to stay connected, to unite during these times, I want to encourage everybody to check out Spurs Give. They're doing some incredible things right now, and they're such a valuable partner, not just to the Basketball Embassy, but to the city of San Antonio, the youth in this community. So again, this is a free clinic for everybody out there, but if you're able, it would go a long way. It'd be money well spent if you can make a donation. It keeps access to this content to that individual well beyond this clinic. So I wanted to say that, man, and again, just a heartfelt and very sincere thank you to you for your time and for spending so much time with us today.
Chris, man, I appreciate you and allowing me the space to get out a lot of these thoughts and these ideas and this tool. I hope it's been helpful. Again, I know it's a lot, and it usually takes a lot of sessions and Q&A and follow up to kind of go through it, but and a lot of aha moments are firing as you go through it. So hopefully it was clear, concise for you, but really I'm just grateful for the opportunity. And as you mentioned, for Spurs Give, that's an incredible organization, an incredible part of what we do for our community here in San Antonio. So any sort of resource or donation is helpful. So thank you.
Thank you so much, man. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to being in touch.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, Chris.
All right. Take care.
Take care.